Hey TCS TV viewers, it's Dave and Evelyn from the camera store.
And we are coming to you today from the camera store because we had an early look at the Olympus OM-D E-M5 Mark III.
Now Olympus flew us down to Moab, Utah to really experience all that this new camera has to offer.
We're going to talk to you guys about what we liked about the camera, what we didn't like, and our overall experience using it in one of the most beautiful and adventurous places in America. To get things started, let's talk a little bit about what this new Micro Four Thirds camera is all about. Now, the E-M5 Mark III is a long overdue addition to this very popular system.
Yeah, it's been 4 years, I believe, since the Mark II came out.
Yeah, the Mark II came out in 2015, and it was really well loved, just like its original, for being really sleek, stylish, kind of retro, and just really nice to use in terms of the dials and some of the overall feel.
Yeah, now the first upgrade we're going to talk about is the sensor. It inherits the same sensor that's in the EM1X, their flagship camera. It's a 20 megapixel Micro Four Thirds sensor, and it promises to deliver better high ISO performance.
One of the other things that it has in common with the EM1X is the processor. So it has one of the processors that's found in the flagship model, and that's able to help with overall autofocus performance. So you're going to get faster autofocus performance using phase detection as well as contrast, but you aren't able to take advantage of the machine learning setup that we had in the EM1X.
Olympus has upgraded the sensor, they've upgraded the processor, and they've upgraded the grip and the fit and finish a little bit, but it's not this monumental change in a camera.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, when you look at it on paper at first, it doesn't really seem that exciting. There's a lot of other cameras in the market that have very similar specs. And so you have to really look at what this camera system is all about to see if this might even be an option for you. One of the things that really struck me on this trip is that we are carrying a Micro Four Thirds system, and we didn't experience this with the EM1X because it was still a fairly big camera.
Yes.
But with this one, I was carrying the camera, 4 different lenses, and a bunch of my only personal stuff in a fairly small shoulder bag. And it felt like I was hardly carrying anything at all.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there, right? Carrying sort of a full system around with you in a smaller bag. Really, we took advantage of that in our adventures in Moab.
Yeah.
Now, our first excursion with Olympus was to Arches National Park, which if you haven't been there, it was our first time there. It's one of the most gorgeous national parks I've ever been to.
It's a bunch of arches.
It's a bunch of arches.
They are very beautiful though. They're made of this amazing slick red rock, and there's sand everywhere and cactuses, and it really is quite stunning.
It's honestly, it's an awe-inspiring place to go to. It's like you hear about it and you're like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah. Even though it was midday and it was crazy windy, we were still able to get some good photo opportunities out of it.
Now, Olympus had hired a local canyoneer to help model for us, and it was great. Now, it was very, very windy that day. And
it's crazy.
It was crazy. All of us were getting blown over. People were losing hats. Now, the model was very strong, and she was able to hold some crazy poses for quite a while in the wind.
Yeah, like on the edge of cliffs. But yeah, the sand was just blowing everywhere, and if you touched your face, you had this like residue of this really fine kind of gritty sand, and it's nowhere that you would normally want to bring your cameras.
Yeah, and it's definitely someplace that I would normally not ever think about changing a lens. But I threw caution to the wind, quite literally, and I swapped lenses now, both of us on both days that were very, very dusty and dry. Neither one of us had any dust on our sensors and our photos.
Yeah, another thing about these cameras is that Olympus has really good weather sealing, and this is no exception. All of the different inputs have really good rubber seals. You can actually see them, and I have really good faith in them. We've taken Olympus cameras through all kinds of crazy torture tests. We've taken them into pools, we've taken them in -40-degree weather, and in this case, because we were in the sandy desert, we decided that we were going to do a bit of a sand test. So on that first excursion, we actually poured some of the really fine sand over the camera to see how it was going to hold up. And something you probably shouldn't do with the camera, but it held up really well.
Yeah, I don't recommend doing that to any camera. I think you're just tempting fate.
Not on purpose. But beaches happen. You want to make sure that the camera that you have is going to be able to withstand the elements that you're putting it through. The next place that Olympus took us to was this amazing working ranch. It was absolutely stunning. It was kind of old-fashioned, and it had these amazing red rocks surrounding it.
Yeah, I mean, film icons like John Wayne has filmed there a bunch of times. Marlboro commercials have been filmed there. It's really a picturesque, amazing ranch. Now, it gave us a really good chance to try out the different autofocus modes this camera has to offer.
Yeah, and this camera does have the ability to do tracking. You do have to keep in mind that you can only do that if you're shooting continuous in their low mode, which is 6 frames per second.
Yeah, so we tried out a bunch of different focusing modes on this. You do have 121 autofocus points to choose from. You can choose an individual one. You can group a cluster of 5, 9, or 25, or of course 121. And if you're really precise, and especially for still life, you can choose this precision point.
Yeah, this camera also has face and eye detection, and I found it worked fairly well. I was happy with a lot of the portrait results that I got. Most of them were in focus. This isn't Sony level face and eye detection, where you're able to see the eye being tracked from quite far away. In this case, the face has to actually fill the frame quite significantly before you actually see the eye detection kick in.
Yeah, I noticed that as well as you're playing around with shooting the different scenarios and the different setups. This camera will shoot up to 10 frames per second in mechanical shutter, but to do that you cannot change your focus, your exposure, or your white balance. If you switch to electronic shutter, you will get 10 frames per second with full autofocus, but just be mindful of rolling shutter.
Another thing that we noticed while we were at the ranch is that we did have the opportunity to shoot in some very low light environments. So we were shooting in some of the tack rooms that were basically lit by one incandescent light bulb. And in those cases, this is where the Micro Four Thirds system suffers. So if you are shooting a lot of low light material, this is something to be aware of, that the Micro Four Thirds system just doesn't do as well as some of the larger sensors.
Yeah.
I'm finding that sometimes the low light images look a little bit mushy. They don't have that crispness that I would really like to see.
After a great day of shooting at that iconic ranch, Olympus set us up for a very cool shooting experience shooting stars with their live composite feature. We went back to Arches National Park to a location where it's called Balancing Rock. Now, as you can imagine, it's a tiny little foundation with a big rock balancing on top of it.
Yeah, I believe Dave referred to it as the potato on a fork and thought we could just make this at home with those supplies.
We had a great chance to do what's called live composite, and this is a very cool feature. It allows you to take a base exposure of your foreground and then you let the stars kind of sink in. Now what's cool about this is that it stacks the images one on top of another and sort of keeps building the images right in front of you. So in my case, I had it set for 6-second exposures and I let the camera run like this for a half an hour, leaving me pretty decent star trails. Now sadly, it looked really good until 10 minutes before I wanted to stop it. Clouds rolled in and they kind of really, messed up my shot. That's why I converted it to black and white.
I really like the look of the color in Moab, and I liked that the moon was lighting the rocks and giving kind of this interesting look where it almost looked like daytime, but you still had stars in the shot, and then I was kind of playing more with the clouds themselves and getting more of the cloud streaks opposed to the star trails. But it's a lot of fun to play around with, and because it shows you that live image, you're able to see right away what you're building and see what that end result's going to be. And you can stop it at any time.
Yeah, I can totally see people that are really into light painting are going to love this feature.
I did find it a bit tricky to manually focus on the rocks themselves, but the nice thing is that Olympus has peaking as well as a punch-in zoom, so you can actually focus on stars and items in your scene a little bit easier.
Yeah, it is still tricky though, and it's not. It's kind of an experimental style of photography.
Yeah, and one of the things that they changed, which is really handy, is that they've actually moved the bulb exposure mode right on the dial, and so on the back dial itself, you actually just have to switch it a few times to get into live composite, where before you had to go through the shutter priority and keep adjusting the shutter speed as low until you got into live composite.
Now, shooting stars was a lot of fun. It's something I don't do very much of, but I really enjoyed myself that night and playing around with this camera. Now, we were promised the next morning there's a beautiful place called Dead Horse Canyon, which is amazing at sunrise.
Yes, and again, it's really cold at sunrise. Even though you're in the desert, we were freezing. And I mean, this is coming from people that are used to being in the cold weather, but we were shivering and quite tired too.
Yeah, I was not prepared like I should have been. I didn't bring everything, and I wish I did.
But as soon as the sun started coming up over the cliffs, this is where the magic happened. And it's where we were able to take advantage of the high-res mode. Now, this camera is not able to do the handheld high-res mode that we loved about the EM1X. Instead, you do have to use a tripod, but you are able to achieve a 50 megapixel image.
Now that's pretty impressive. We have a 20 megapixel sensor, and how it does it is by using its sensor shift. It shifts over a half pixel for 8 shots and stacks them all together to give you a 50 megapixel file from a 20 megapixel sensor.
Yeah, and a place like Dead Horse Canyon is really the kind of place where you would use this mode. It was really perfect because you want to be able to capture as much detail as possible, and it's the kind of beautiful place where you could envision yourself printing a massive image to put on your wall of this kind of monumental location.
Yeah, we were all kind of going crazy for it. It was amazing, right? And the light is fleeting. We only have sunrise for a little while before the light kind of flattened out. But I think we got some very cool stuff and certainly some high-res shots.
Speaking of sensor shift, Olympus cameras do have really good image stabilization, and this model has half a stop better performance than the predecessor. So with non-stabilized lenses, you can get 5.5 stops of image stabilization, and with the dual stabilization of the lens and the sensor, you're able to get up to 6.5 stops.
Now that's crazy. It's like it's a gyro in your hand. It's amazing what kind of shutter speeds you can get away with shooting with a system like this.
And they have refined the system so it is actually a little bit smaller, and so that's contributed to the overall compactness and the new design of this body.
Yeah, now it's important to know that the stabilization is both for stills and for video.
Yeah, now the video features on this camera are not spectacular. Yes, it can shoot in 4K 30, 24, and 25p, and it has a microphone jack, but it does not have a headphone jack, and the image stabilization on it is quite good.
Yeah, we found ourselves in the back seat of an H1 Hummer doing some pretty crazy 4x4ing.
Yes, we were on Slick Rock and it was extremely bumpy. We were sitting up in the back row and we were pretty impressed with how different the image was once it was activated.
Now, a feature that I found myself using all the time on this camera is the flip out screen, and it does articulate properly in my opinion. I do like it like this. It's great for stills and for video, and it is a touch screen.
Yes, and that's really nice because you can move your autofocus points around, you can navigate the menu, and you can move your autofocus points around just like you can on a Canon camera when the viewfinder is up to your eye. That's
a very handy feature. Now, the viewfinder itself, what do you think of that?
Yeah, so the viewfinder itself is a decent viewfinder. It's 2.36 million dots. It actually has slightly less magnification than the predecessor, which I was a little bit surprised by, but the panel itself is actually a little bit brighter. It's an OLED, and so you're getting a much brighter picture.
Yeah, I found it very usable. I know we get spoiled with some other cameras in the market, but for this size of camera and for what this camera is designed for, I had no problems with it at all, especially when I was shooting the action.
Yeah, and it's absolutely necessary in extremely bright conditions in the desert when you have a lot of reflection. It's really difficult to see the screen when you're in that kind of environment. The thing that I really appreciate about this camera in particular is that it feels really solid considering how small and lightweight it is. It kind of has like that really rugged feeling construction, and I like how rugged and tactile all of the buttons and dials are. It's a really good feeling camera, and the little changes that they've done with the ergonomics also feel really nice.
Yeah, you can tell they put a lot of time and care into the fit and finish of this camera. It does feel better. It feels a little more better machined. And it does feel heavier than it looks. When you first pick it up, you think it should be a lightweight camera, but it feels very solid.
It feels solid, yeah, and well balanced. And although it's small, I found that the grip really forms well in my hand. And I can't get over the fact that with their lenses, you can pack a lot of glass around with you. Even their longest 300mm telephoto lens, you can pack that in a carry-on luggage bag.
Yeah, but this is a very sizable lens that you can easily carry with you along with the several other lenses and not even know about it.
Yeah, now one of the changes that we were a little bit surprised by is that they've actually put in a smaller battery with a little bit lower milliampage. And so with that in mind, they've actually changed the processing power. And so even though the battery is smaller with slightly less capacity, it's getting the same CIPA rating.
Yeah, now we found that it worked quite well for us. CIPA rating is 310 shots, and I think that's pretty accurate.
And because it has USB charging, you don't actually have to ever take the battery out of the camera unless you want to have a spare. Now, we carried a spare around with us because we were in the middle of the desert.
And we were shooting a lot.
But it's nice that Olympus actually includes the traditional charger as well, in addition to the USB cable.
And that's great, because if I'm going to travel with the system, even as small as it is, I am going to carry an extra battery. And I want to be able to charge one battery in an external charger while I'm shooting with the camera.
Overall, I was actually really happy with this camera. I have to say, I enjoyed shooting with it. I enjoyed having it in my bag and being able to carry around a lot of different glass options, from macro to telephoto zoom to some primes, and feel like I could really get away with bringing it all with me.
Yeah, now I did find this camera a little bit on the small side, and I do like to have a little bit of a grip with it. And they do have an optional grip, ECG5, I think it's called.
Yeah, the ECG5. It doesn't give you any additional power, but it does give you kind of a beefier handle to it, and it would definitely be a good option for Dave.
Yeah. Now, I look at a camera like this as a really small, great little camera packed with features like the high-res shot, like the live composite shot, things that allow me to take one tool and shoot such a variety of things in a really fun way.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at this camera, you have to decide what you like about it. I think the weather sealing is really compelling. Certainly the style and the feel of it is really good. But there are some other cameras on the market to consider that are older that might have some features that actually outdo it.
Yeah, I mean, Olympus is tagging this too as sort of an accessory camera for their M1X. If you're already a pro user with all the different lenses, but you don't want a big body, but you still want to have a sort of backup body, this is a really logical option.
Yeah, and it's certainly necessary for them to upgrade from the EM5 II system. I mean, that was 4 years ago that camera came out, and so it was certainly due for an upgrade. We just would have liked to see maybe a little bit more. When it comes down to it, I think the benefit of this camera is really the experience of it. Being able to chuck it in your bag, not really worrying about what kind of weather conditions you're taking it through, and also just having that portability with some advanced features.
Yeah, a camera that you can take through all your experiences, not really sure what you're going to be faced with, but you've got a really good tool with a lot of little tricks up its sleeve that allow you to experience that and really bring home some great memories.
Yeah, I think this kind of stuff is going to keep the Micro Four Thirds system alive and well for a long time. And of course, we want to know, what do you guys think? Is the OM-D E-M5 Mark III a good option? Is this something that you would consider? Is it totally off your radar? Let us know by commenting below.
Make sure you follow us on Instagram.
And if you're new to our channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so we can catch you again very soon.